Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I want to focus on the stuff going on under the baseboard. I'll keep it short and snappy because we might want to do a deep dive into some of these things later on. However, before I get into the video, I'd like to take a moment to thank everybody who has watched my content and engaged with me over the last few weeks. I had no expectations on how my content would be received, and it's really nice to see the channel growing. If you like what you see, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe because it makes such a big difference to how many people will see this. So, let's get into the video. The first thing you need to know about my layout is I run it on DCC. To start the layout, I bought a DCC Hornby train set. The set was the Somerset Belle. I bought it off eBay for less than 100 quid. It was a bargain, really. The reason I started the layout this way was because, firstly, I wanted a train that would work on DCC, but secondly, I was keen to get my hands on a cheap DCC controller, and the Hornby Select was that. It was cheap and it looked easy to use. I think the Select's a great controller to start with, and this is because it looks relatively easy to use, and it's not too different from your standard analog controller. For me, it felt like a natural evolution, as some of the mid to high range DCC controllers look a little complicated. And we all know there's a lot to learn when starting in the hobby, especially when you're wanting to delve into the world of DCC. I used my Select for roughly 12 months before wanting to move to something a little bit more sophisticated. It's at this point I bought the Dynamis Ultima by Bachmann. Bachmann's a company I wasn't aware of when I first bought my original Select, but it's now one I follow, and it's one I buy items from. It's worth pointing out that I do continue to use my Select for programming locos, for use on my rolling road, and for running on my test track when I want to run locos in. To be honest, it's quite nice to have two controllers. I imagine some of you are wondering why I chose the Dynamis. Well, there's a number of reasons. Firstly, I like the large LCD screen. It shows you more information at a glance. I also like that it's wireless. I can hold it and move around the layout without worrying about trailing wires. And let's face it, a few less wires is really a good thing. The final reason is I like the large big switch that you control the locos with. It feels good in your hands and it has a real quality feel about it. Anyway, enough about my setup. Let's take a closer look at the underside of the baseboard. As you can see, it's pretty busy. To be fair, it could do with a little tidy up. I think we'll tackle this video by starting with the power supply and following it through to the point it connects to the tracks. We'll then look at the electrics for the points. As we're going through, if you have any questions about what I've done or why I've done something, or even suggestions for how I can improve things on my layout, then please do drop them in the comments section below. I'm all ears. It's also worth mentioning at this point that I'm not an electrician and I have no qualifications in electronics. This is purely a hobby for me, and what I say I've done works for me and may not work for you. Finally, when working with electronics, be careful, and make sure that you disconnect your layout from the mains electricity. The transformer I use is Gagemaster's GMC M1. It's a 16 volt AC transformer. It's a great product. It's a very compact power supply with two independent 16 volt outputs. Gagemaster is a trustworthy company, and they've made a well-built product that's easy to use. In fact, it's as simple as plug and play. I use one of the outputs for powering my point switches and CDU, and the other output is currently vacant, but I do intend on using it to power a accessory bus to support things like lighting on the layout. Let's talk about how I get power to the rails. So, power runs from my Dynamis into the layout module through a 16 amp pluggable terminal block. Each board will have a terminal block at either end. The idea is that as the layout grows and more modules are added, I can simply plug them into each other. I've watched a number of accounts on YouTube taking this approach, and it appears to be working really well. The block then feeds the first of many terminal strips on the layout. I'm using ones that come with jump strips to make it easier. From the terminal strip, I've run 3 bus cables. The 3 bus wires run horizontally along the baseboard and sit between the 3 rows of point motors. The wire I've used for the bus is 32 02mm or 17 AWG. This is a general purpose stranded wire sized suitably for running long lengths of DCC bus cable. I want to point out I buy all my wire for my layout off of Railway Scenics. When I first started the layout and focused on the electrics, it's fair to say I was a little bit overwhelmed. There's so much to choose from. The Railway Scenics website is really helpful when it comes to selecting your wire because of the great product descriptions and advice on their product pages. If you're just getting started, I suggest you go and pay them a visit. Every piece of track on my layout is connected to the bus cable. I connect dropper wires to both rails and feed them through the baseboard. I use 1602mm or 20 AWG general purpose stranded wire for this. This wire is suitable for use as DCC droppers, wires and all solenoid point motor wiring. The last thing I'm going to talk about today is how I connect the dropper wires to the DCC bus cable. There are lots of different options here and lots of different ways of doing it. And it's fair to say I've watched plenty of YouTube channels to work out what's the best approach. After many hours of watching, I eventually landed on DCC Concepts bus terminal tags. These are fantastic for securing bus cable to the baseboard, but also make it really simple for connecting the dropper wires to the bus. This is achievable by soldering the droppers to the appropriate eyelet holes. Well, that's it for part 1 of this episode. We've covered the main aspects of my power bus cable. I hope you found it interesting. In part 2, we'll take a look at powering the points and switches. Guys, it would be great if we could get this content in front of as many people as possible. And to do that, I do need your help. Commenting, liking and subscribing really does have a big impact on the YouTube algorithm. The more of these things the video receives, the more the algorithm takes notice. So, if you've enjoyed the content, let me know by clicking a few buttons. It only takes a few seconds, and I really do appreciate it. Until next time, keep those trains on the tracks. Bye guys.